says, like, earlier I sort of outlined a few of the characteristics of disciplinary knowledge. Now I'm going to outline a few of the characteristics of transdisciplinarity. So transdisciplinarity says essentially three important statements. The first one is different ways of knowing. It says that there's not only one way of knowing. There's not only the epistemic kind of way. There's not only the disciplinary, although it doesn't say that, it doesn't discredit those ways of knowing, but it says it's not enough. We have to have different ways of knowing. It says no single worldview can account for the totality of the world. So all the scientists together, even if there were thousands and thousands and thousands of them, would never know the totality of the world, because the totality of the world is not science only. We need quantitative and qualitative research. We need received knowledge and experienced knowledge. We need, and I'm going to get to that place, we need third-person research and first and second-person research. I'm going to explain that a little bit later. And we need all of this, and collectively. No single worldview can account for the totality of the world, so we have to learn the other ways. It also says that there are different levels of reality, like the inert matter, the living systems, human experience. They operate according to different logic, different laws. You cannot apply the laws of chemistry to understanding the human psyche. You cannot apply the laws of sociology to understanding the emotional world of the human being. I mean, these are, as we'd say in transdisciplinarity, different levels of reality. So they require different ways, different approaches. You cannot just take one for the other. And one of the problems being that today the scientific method is sort of the one that's taken for everywhere. And there's not a problem with the scientific method in itself. The problem is when we take it for something else. So, and I want to draw your attention on this. Like a house or like a coat, reality has an exterior side of facts and behaviors, and it has an interior side of meaning and experience. And that's the interior side of meaning and experience that is lost in that collective knowledge. And finally, in transdisciplinary studies, there is this notion of complexity. This is a very important notion. It says that the parts are as complex as the whole. The whole is no less complex than the parts, and the parts are no less complex than the whole. This is very important, because if we're talking about a system, for instance, the people making a family, each person like the system is complex enough, but each person in the system is as complex in herself or himself as the system. And the same for in a society, like each person in this class is just as complex as the whole class in itself. I mean, there's kind of an infinity of complexity. And that is an important thing for some kind of reductionist sciences in the social sciences. Like sociology can make sort of general statements and stuff, so lose part of this notion of complexity. So, forgive my chart here. I'll just go, it's my creative product. I'll just go quickly over it. It's this notion of the levels of reality. Like if we put the world from the simplest to the most complex, we'd start with the elementary particles, and then the atoms, and then the molecules. And then we'll go, the molecules together would do rocks and crystals, then stellar systems, and then the galaxies and the universe. So they're organized this way, and all the natural sciences account for that. These are the laws of the natural sciences. But if, in the molecules, I take the carbon molecule, and then I go into a different world, the world of complex molecules, of proteins and amino acids, and living cells, and living organisms, and ecosystems, and the biosphere. And I go this way. And the laws in here are not the same as here. And finally, in those living cells and living organisms, if I take the exception of the human individual, then it gets to a different place again. It has two sides, an interior and an exterior side. It has, like, you know, an observer that looks at you, and you are the they for me, or the experiencer. And then if I put all the sort of third person kind of thing, like I look at them, and I'll see groups of human beings, families, tribes and societies, and humanity. If I look at the experiencer, then it's me, and then it's me and the other, me and the others, my memory, my imagination. I'm inside myself. So I just wanted to stay here, to be here, and explain this last piece, which is what I call the third person research, or the first and second person research. In the sciences, we do, as I said earlier, third person research. We look at. It's a they. It's they, the animals, or they, or it, sorry, it, the nature, or them, the people. You know, it's a third person research. Is the social sciences and all the sciences has a sort of third person kind of thing because of its ideal of objectivity. But I also need first person research. I also need to look at the world in a different way, and I think we need both to look at, like, I am at the center of the world, and I will start from what I see, and I will look around. And that's first person research. And as soon as in my world I look around, I'm starting to talk about other things or other people. I'm talking about my relationship with them. They become other to me. They're not they are you nature, or, you know, that I'm in relationship with. So first person research will be really grounded in my own experience, in the person's experience. Doesn't mean it will always be about me, but it will be from my place. And that's what we do in this program, this first person research, or that, you know, is sort of the best way to ground it. And that's my last proposal to you, which is my elements for discussion. Just what I said, first and second person research is important. Phenomenology, if you can just stay with me for two more difficult words. Phenomenology is one of the most interesting school of thought in philosophy in the 20th century, where it said, in response to some of the things that were happening in science and philosophy, it said, let's try to put aside, first identify and then put aside our biases, our interpretations, what I think of the world, and get back to what is. Can I do that as much as possible? Of course someone will say, no, it's impossible. But let's say I tend to. Like, I go as far as I can, you know, to saying this is the experience. So instead, if I write my memoir, for instance, instead of saying, at that moment my father was so angry at me, blah, 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 I will not say that. Angry is an interpretation. I will say, his face was this, and he was shouting at me those words, and that's the phenomenology. I'm saying the phenomenon. I'm trying to say what really happened, not what I thought of it or what I interpreted, and really always like seek to get as closely as possible to what I actually experienced, even if it's very intimate, even if it's very, you know, sort of inside, it's emotional. That's possible. I think it's possible to go. I know it's possible to go as close to the actual phenomenon as possible. So in first-person research, so that we do not only like spin in our head and keep turning in circles in our biases and prejudices and whatever, we try to do that phenomenological approach.
Do you still use interpretations like that is a book, for example? Like even the object itself, calling it a book is an interpretation. Do you still use it?
Well, it depends on where you are. It depends on what you're doing. If you're not looking at the object in the room, then you can go and say it's a book. But if you're not, if you're looking at, I don't know, if your subject of inquiry is writing, for instance, the phenomenon of writing, and you know then maybe you will want to be more specific in terms of books and not call it a book, but you know, really describe it. It depends on at what level you're putting your, you know, at what you're looking at.
Mm.
Yes?
So in context,
it's the description versus the interpretation. Yes. The description, yes. Yeah, okay. So the description of you teaching the class as opposed to my interpretation of what I'm receiving from you as far as my definition of information. I think I said it better. No, okay. I'll say it. Let me just try and say it differently. Like in first-person research, it's easy to get lost into what you already know and just keep, spinning the things you've always said about yourself and all these theories we have about ourselves. Yeah, I'm a post-traumatic, whatever, and I know that about myself, and that's my theory about myself. And instead of spinning that, keep like saying this, I will try and get back at, because I'm talking about research, first-person research. I will try to get down to the thing. I will try to sort of take out the interpretations that I have so that I can get as close as possible to the actual experience. So it's kind of a guideline. Okay. All right? Yes?
It's almost like you have to undo everything you've ever learned. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, when you're 5, I'm still at 5.
Okay.
And I'm explaining something to you. And the way that 5-year-olds speak, they haven't had a lot of education. And so when they say, she was so mad, her face turned red, and she looked like she would go up, and I'm not saying that she was angry at me.
No, you're describing.
I'm describing what happened.
But 20 years down the road, you will remember that thing, and you will say she was angry.
Right.
And you get back to that, to the experience, and remember.
That's what phenomenology
right.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
It will be part of that. Ralph?
There's another context in which
Go ahead.
in recent years we've been using phenomenology in the sense of place within the context of humanistic geography, in that a place doesn't have an identity separate from the experience of the person who's experiencing that place. So a place is different dependent on who's experiencing it. And there are elements in common, but you can't study a place without studying that experience. And so the experience of a place is a phenomenon distinctive to itself.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I mean.